The nation sat in stunned silence as President Marcus Blake's voice echoed through every living room, smartphone, and public screen. His face was as impassive as the marble busts of past presidents displayed behind him in the Oval Office.
We stand at the crossroads of history,
Blake intoned, his calm demeanor in stark contrast to the radical reforms he outlined. Project 2025, a sweeping overhaul of the federal government, would concentrate executive power, dismantle traditional checks and balances, and establish a new order dubbed extreme democracy. Half the nation erupted in anger. The other half erupted in cheers. For Blake supporters, this was a necessary evolution, a bold step toward a streamlined, efficient government. For his detractors, it was the death knell of democracy. Ethan Ross sat on the worn couch of his apartment, surrounded by the blue glow of multiple screens. News anchors shouted over one another on split screens.
"This is tyranny,"
a fiery commentator exclaimed.
"This is leadership."
Another shot back. Ethan muted the cacophony, leaning back and letting the weight of the announcement settle. He wasn't a stranger to political upheaval, but this was different. The country wasn't being pushed toward authoritarianism. It was sprinting. Ethan opened the PDF of Project 2025. At first glance, the document was filled with legal jargon and bureaucratic vagueness. But as he dug deeper, the implications became chillingly clear. Section 4.1.1. The Executive Office shall oversee electoral commissions. Section 7.2.5. Media outlets deemed a threat to national stability shall be subject to provisional oversight.
This isn't democracy.
Ethan muttered.
This is a dictatorship in disguise.
The next day, Ethan met a whistleblower in the back booth of a dingy diner. She was nervous, her hands trembling as she slid a flash drive across the table.
Everything's on there.
She whispered.
The corporate funding, the meetings, all of it.
Who's pulling the strings?
Ethan asked. Her eyes darted around.
If I tell you, they'll come for both of us.
Victoria Crane, Blake's unflinching chief of staff, appeared on every major network. Her tone was calm, her arguments cutting.
This is not a power grab. This is the evolution of democracy. A government that works for the people, not against them.
Ethan watched, his stomach churning. She was lying, and she was damn good at it. That evening, Ethan found a small package outside his door. No return address. Inside was a USB drive wrapped in a note. For the truth, Ethan plugged it into his laptop, his heart pounding. Files filled the screen. Meeting transcripts, funding records, and a shocking slide deck titled Iron Fist. Implementation plan.
Holy shh.
Ethan trailed off, his hands trembling as he scrolled.
You can't publish this.
Ethan's editor, Dan Carter, said flatly. They sat in the newsroom, the hum of keyboards and phones a constant backdrop.
You think I'm scared of Blake?
Ethan shot back.
No, but you should be scared of Crane.
Dan replied.
This isn't just politics anymore, it's survival.
The streets of Washington, D.C. swelled with protesters holding signs. No to Project 2025 and Save Democracy. Police in riot gear lined the barricades. Tear gas filled the air as the crowd surged, their chants of "We the People" drowned out by the blaring of bullhorns. Back in his apartment, Ethan studied the documents on the USB drive. Logos of megacorporations like Arkhold Industries and Garrison Group dotted the financial records. They were funding Project 2025.
This isn't Blake's vision.
Ethan realized.
It's theirs.
Ethan made the call to Jillian Hayes late at night. Her voice was terse, guarded.
If you have proof, we need to meet, and make it fast. They're watching me, too.
Jillian was waiting in a car parked in a desolate lot under a highway overpass. She motioned for Ethan to get in.
This is bigger than you think.
She said as he slid into the passenger seat.
And it's going to get worse.
As Ethan walked back to his apartment, her words echoed in his mind.
They'll kill anyone who gets in their way.
For the first time, he hesitated, but as he looked at the USB drive in his hand, resolve hardened his face. He had to publish. The marble halls of the Supreme Court echoed with measured footsteps as Victoria Crane strode into the chambers. Her sharp navy blue suit and unwavering gaze exuded authority.
Ladies and gentlemen,
She began, her voice cold but commanding.
the reforms are non-negotiable. The court's role in this new era will be advisory, nothing more.
Chief Justice Palmer, an elderly man with a dignified presence, leaned forward. You cannot dissolve centuries of jurisprudence with the stroke of a pen. Crane smiled faintly.
We already have.
Outside, chaos erupted. Protesters with signs like "Keep the courts free" and "No to dictatorship" clashed with riot police. Chants echoed against the marble steps, growing louder as the justices exited under heavy guard. Ethan watched from a distance, his camera capturing the palpable tension. He noticed the fear in the justices' faces. The balance of power was crumbling before their eyes. Jillian Hayes stood at the podium, her voice rising above the murmurs of the packed auditorium.
We cannot let them silence us,
She declared. The crowd erupted into cheers, but the celebration was cut short as the auditorium doors slammed open. Agents in black suits and earpieces stormed in, their presence an unspoken threat.
You're coming with us, Senator.
One agent barked. The audience gasped as Jillian stood firm.
Over my dead body.
Chaos erupted as the agents advanced. Jillian turned to the fire exit, motioning for Ethan.
This way.
She shouted. Ethan hesitated, capturing a final photo of the confrontation before darting after her. They burst into an alley, pursued by the agents. Jillian grabbed a metal trash lid and hurled it at their pursuers, buying precious seconds to flee into the maze of side streets. In the Oval Office, Crane stood before President Blake and a group of senior advisors. The tension in the room was palpable.
We'll disband the oversight committees within the week.
Crane said.
They've become redundant.
Blake nodded, staring out the window at the protesters.
Make it happen. No loose ends.
Ethan's phone buzzed with another failed call. His contact list, once filled with whistleblowers and insiders, now led only to voicemail or disconnected numbers.
Another one gone.
He muttered, slamming his phone onto the desk. A chill ran down his spine as he realized how systematically Crane was silencing dissent.
Look at this.
Jillian said, sliding a manila envelope across the hood of her car. Ethan flipped through the documents inside, his jaw tightening.
Funding records. Corporate payouts. This ties Crane directly to Arkhold and Garrison Group.
She's their puppet, but she's also the one holding the strings.
But the agents were coming for them. They jumped into the car and took off. Tires screeched as Jillian floored the accelerator, the agents' SUVs hot on their tail. Ethan clung to the dashboard, shouting directions.
Left here!
Jillian yanked the wheel, narrowly avoiding a collision. The agents weren't so lucky, their lead vehicle slamming into a light pole.
Hold on!
Jillian shouted, gunning the car toward a freeway ramp. They barely made it away from the agents.
Dan, you can't kill the story.
Ethan slammed his fist on the desk. Dan avoided his gaze.
They came to me, Ethan. They threatened my family. I won't risk it.
Then I'll publish it myself.
Ethan growled. Dan sighed.
You'll be on your own.
Ethan met with a group of independent journalists in the basement of an abandoned building. Laptops and printers hummed as they reviewed the evidence he had brought.
This is the real deal. We'll get it out there.
One of them said. Ethan nodded, his heart pounding. The truth was finally taking shape. Crane addressed the nation in a televised statement. Her words were sharp and unyielding.
Those who oppose this administration are not patriots. They are traitors to democracy.
Ethan watched from a safe house, his stomach twisting as public polls began to shift in her favor. News outlets parroted the administration's narrative, labeling Ethan as the leader of a domestic terror group. His face was splashed across screens with headlines like "Journalist Turned Radical." Ethan stared at his reflection in a broken mirror, the weight of the world pressing down on him. The reflective vest and cap felt heavy on Ethan's shoulders as he pushed a janitor's cart down the pristine hallways of the government think tank. His badge, a hastily forged replica, passed the scanner at the staff entrance with a quiet beep. Every step was calculated. He wiped at spotless counters and emptied trash cans, his eyes darting to the surveillance cameras mounted at every corner. Ahead, the double doors marked Project Iron Fist. Authorized personnel only loomed. Ethan's heart thudded in his chest as two guards walked past him, their conversation clipped and professional. He kept his head down, mopping furiously as they passed.
Level 3 lockdown starts at midnight.
One of them muttered.
No exceptions.
Ethan forced himself to breathe evenly, gripping the handle of his cart tighter as the guards disappeared around the corner. The file was buried in a folder labeled Public Stabilization Plan. Ethan's hands trembled as he scrolled through holographic blueprints. The schematics detailed the infrastructure of an election-free governance system, regional governors appointed by the executive office, corporate advisory panels, and a new enforcement division.
This isn't stabilization. This is control.
Scrolling further, Ethan found documents signed with Crane's digital signature. Phase 1, complete restructuring of oversight mechanisms. Phase 2, permanent executive authority. The documents detailed chillingly precise plans, all traced back to Crane's name. Ethan realized Blake was a puppet. Crane was the real power behind the throne.
Impressive, isn't it?
The voice was soft, but unmistakable. Ethan spun around to see Jillian standing in the doorway, her expression calm and unreadable. She stepped forward, heels clicking against the tile.
Jillian?
Ethan whispered, his mind racing.
What the hell are you doing here?
Jillian's calm shattered Ethan's world.
We're collapsing, Ethan.
She said, her voice carrying a mix of conviction and regret.
Crane's vision is the only way to hold this country together. Elections are too chaotic, too inefficient. The people want strong leadership.
Ethan shook his head.
You're justifying a dictatorship. You're betraying everything you stood for.
I'm saving what I can.
She replied coldly. Before Ethan could reply, the sound of boots echoed down the hallway. Jillian's lips twitched in something between regret and satisfaction.
I called them.
She said quietly. Ethan bolted toward the emergency exit as the doors behind him burst open. Guards shouted, their footsteps closing in. He hit the stairwell at full speed, taking the steps 2 at a time. The compound's perimeter fence loomed ahead, its electrified wires humming ominously. Ethan limped through the grass, blood seeping from a gash on his arm. He spotted a gap in the patrols and darted toward it, ducking under the fence just as the guards rounded the corner. Behind him, alarms blared like shrieks in the night. Ethan sat in a dingy basement, fingers flying across the keyboard. The makeshift broadcast rig sparked and groaned, but it worked.
Project Iron Fist is a lie,
Ethan said, his voice steady despite the panic in his chest.
This isn't democracy. This is control.
He pressed send, watching the files upload to every major network. Across the country, screens lit up with Ethan's broadcast. Office workers paused mid-task. Teenagers huddled around phones, and protesters gasped at the revelations. News outlets scrambled to verify the documents, while Crane's administration denounced the broadcast as fake news. Victoria Crane's icy voice filled the airwaves the next morning.
Ethan Ross is a dangerous criminal spreading lies to destabilize our government. He will be brought to justice.
Wanted posters flooded the streets, Ethan's face staring back at him from every corner. Ethan leaned against the damp wall of an underground safe house, his mind racing. He replayed Jillian's words, trying to reconcile the woman he trusted with the one who had betrayed him.
This isn't over,
he whispered, clutching the flash drive with the remaining files. The warehouse smelled of rust and mildew, its walls lined with old machinery and stacks of forgotten crates. A group of people stood around a makeshift table under a flickering fluorescent light.
You're Ethan Ross,
said a woman with cropped hair and sharp eyes. She introduced herself as Maria Santiago, leader of the resistance.
We've been waiting for you.
Ethan placed the flash drive on the table.
Then let's get to work.
Ethan scanned the room. A wiry hacker furiously typed on a laptop, lines of code cascading down the screen. A former senator argued with an ex-military officer about strategy. A whistleblower nervously smoked a cigarette in the corner. Maria crossed her arms.
This isn't just a ragtag bunch, we're organized, and we're ready.
Maria unfolded a blueprint of the executive office's data center.
This is where the truth lives,
she said, jabbing a finger at the map.
We hack their servers, expose the files they're hiding, and show the world what Crane's extreme democracy really is.
Ethan frowned.
And what happens if they catch us?
They won't,
Maria replied, her tone brooking no argument. Across the country, protests swelled. Crowds chanted in unison, waving banners that read, "No to the Iron Fist," and democracy, not tyranny. But the government's response was swift and brutal. Tear gas, rubber bullets, and armored vehicles turned peaceful demonstrations into battleground. President Blake appeared on every screen, his expression grave.
To ensure the safety of all citizens, I'm declaring martial law effective immediately. Curfews will be enforced.
Military trucks rolled through neighborhoods. Streets emptied as fear gripped the nation. Ethan and the resistance huddled in the warehouse, realizing the stakes had just escalated. Disguised as a delivery driver, Ethan transported a hidden data drive through multiple checkpoints. His hands gripped the steering wheel tightly as guards scanned his forged ID. "Move along," a soldier barked. Ethan nodded. Adrenaline coursing through high, he reached the warehouse and handed the drive to Maria.
This is everything. Let's make it count.
The resistance moved like shadows through the sprawling data center. Hackers worked quickly, disabling cameras and unlocking doors. Ethan followed Maria, heart pounding as they crept past armed guards.
This way,
Maria whispered, pointing to a secured room housing the mainframe. Inside the server room, fingers flew over keyboards. Hackers uploaded files while Maria kept watch. Suddenly, alarms blared. Guards swarmed the building as Ethan shouted.
Hold them off!
Files began appearing online, reaching news outlets and public forums. The truth was out. The leaked files caused an uproar. Streets filled with enraged citizens, their chants echoing through cities. Videos of resignations from government officials spread like wildfire. Ethan watched from the warehouse as the news played on a dozen screens.
We hit them hard,
He said, though his voice carried no triumph. Victoria Crane, speaking from the executive office, appeared on every screen.
These so-called whistleblowers are nothing more than anarchists intent on destroying this nation.
Images of Ethan and the resistance filled the broadcast, branded as enemies of the state. Maria cursed under her breath.
She's good. Too good.
Ethan awoke to the sound of boots pounding above.
Found us.
Maria shouted. Resistance members scattered as soldiers stormed the warehouse. Ethan grabbed a duffel bag and followed Maria into a hidden tunnel beneath the floor. The roar of gunfire echoed behind them as they fled into the darkness. Huddled in a new safe house, the resistance regrouped. Maria spread a map on the table.
This isn't over,
She said.
We still have one shot to cripple their propaganda.
Ethan nodded, his face grim. The fight was far from finished. The safe house buzzed with activity as Maria finalized the plans. Ethan leaned against the wall, studying a schematic of the executive office's layout. The goal was clear: break into the nerve center of Crane's operation and cripple her propaganda machine.
Everyone knows their role.
Maria said, her voice cutting through the room's tension.
This is our last shot. Failure isn't an option.
Ethan locked eyes with her.
let's end this.
The streets of Washington, D.C. erupted in chaos. Protesters surged toward barricades, waving signs and chanting against martial law. Ethan's broadcast the night before had been a rallying cry, bringing thousands to the Capitol. Meanwhile, resistance members disguised as protesters slipped through the crowds, ready to enact their plan. Dressed as a maintenance worker, Ethan approached a service entrance guarded by 2 soldiers. Maria's voice crackled in his earpiece.
You're clear. Act natural.
He swiped a forged access card and held his breath. The door beeped, and he stepped inside, blending into the bustle of staff evacuating non-essential personnel. Inside, alarms blared as resistance hackers took control of the building's surveillance system. Cameras flickered and turned off, and doors locked or unlocked at random. Guards shouted orders, their voices lost in the cacophony of chaos. Ethan moved quickly, slipping through the disarray toward the communications hub. The double doors of the president's office slammed open, and Ethan burst in breathless. Victoria Crane stood by the window, her hands clasped behind her back.
I knew you'd come.
She said without turning. Ethan raised his voice.
This ends here. The country won't stand for what you've done.
Crane turned, her expression calm.
The country doesn't need to stand, Ethan. It needs to survive. And survival requires strength, not chaos.
Crane's voice carried a chilling conviction.
Democracy as you know it is a relic. The people have already made their choice. Comfort over responsibility. We're just giving them what they want.
Ethan shook his head.
You're enslaving them, not serving them.
Crane stepped closer.
You're naive, Ethan. The people don't want freedom. They want security. And I'm the only one who can give it to them.
You're playing God, deciding who deserves freedom and who doesn't.
Crane raised an eyebrow.
And what have you done, Ethan? You've destabilized a nation, ignited riots, and destroyed lives for what? An ideology? A dream? Who's really playing God here?
Ethan faltered, her words slicing through his resolve. Crane lunged for the panic button on her desk, but Ethan intercepted her. They grappled, knocking over chairs and smashing a lamp. Crane grabbed a letter opener, slashing at Ethan, who barely dodged. He shoved her back, sending her sprawling into a bookshelf. Both were breathless, bruised, and glaring at each other as the room fell into silence. Ethan stood over Crane, the letter opener in his hand. She stared up at him, defiant even in defeat.
Do it.
She sneered.
Prove you're no better than me.
Ethan tossed the blade aside.
I won't give you the satisfaction. You'll face justice.
As Ethan turned to call into resistance, he heard a sharp sound behind him. He spun to see Crane slumping in her chair, a small vial of poison rolling from her hand.
You can't stop the inevitable.
She whispered with a faint, mocking smile before collapsing. From a commandeered terminal in the office, Ethan played Crane's earlier admission to the public. Her voice echoed across airwaves and screens.
The people don't want freedom. They want security, and I'm the only one who can give it to them.
The nation held its breath as the truth unraveled. As dawn broke, Ethan and the resistance gathered in a new safe house. They were weary but alive. Maria clapped him on the back.
We stopped her, but this isn't over,
she said. Ethan nodded.
It never is.
President Marcus Blake's solemn expression filled every screen in the nation. His voice, steady and composed, carried an eerie calm.
Victoria Cray was a patriot, a visionary. Her death is a tragic loss to this nation. She sacrificed herself for a cause she believed in. A stronger, safer democracy.
Ethan watched from the shadows of a dingy motel room, his fists clenched. The man was a master of manipulation, twisting Crane's death into a rallying cry for her policies. Blake's voice rose with conviction as he leaned forward.
Victoria Crane's work must not be in vain. Effective immediately, the reforms she championed will be fully implemented under my leadership. Together we will honor her legacy.
Across the country, citizens watched with mixed reactions, some in awe, others in horror. Ethan knew what this meant. Crane's extreme democracy was now unstoppable. The streets were alive with anger as protesters gathered in defiance of the new regime. Chants of "No Iron Fist" filled the air, accompanied by the thundering footsteps of military boots. Armored vehicles rolled through neighborhoods. Tear gas canisters arced through the sky, and the screams of the injured punctuated the chaos. Ethan watched from a distance, his heart breaking at the scenes of violence. In a remote cabin deep in the woods, Ethan hunched over a makeshift broadcast rig. Static crackled as he began to speak.
This isn't democracy. This is tyranny. Crane's gone, but Blake's carrying out her vision. The people deserve the truth, not propaganda.
He sent the broadcast to every independent outlet he could find, praying it would reach those still willing to fight. Blake's image returned to the airwaves, his expression grim.
Ethan Ross is not a hero. He is a criminal, a terrorist intent on destroying this country. He and his resistance pose a direct threat to our safety.
Wanted posters bearing Ethan's face flooded every platform, and the bounty on his head climbed higher with each passing hour. The silence of the forest shattered as the low hum of drones filled the air. Ethan bolted from the cabin, sprinting toward a ravine. A deafening explosion ripped through the trees, sending him tumbling into the icy water below. Gasping for breath, he crawled onto the bank, his heart racing as the drones circled overhead. Ethan's movements became more desperate as he navigated towns filled with surveillance cameras and suspicious glances. Posters with his face adorned every corner, and strangers whispered as he passed. He kept his hood up, avoiding eye contact, and slipped into alleyways whenever he felt the weight of too many stares. Trusting anyone was no longer an option. In a remote underground bunker, Ethan met Maria and a few remaining members of the resistance. The atmosphere was tense, their numbers painfully diminished.
We need to strike their propaganda network.
Maria said, pointing to a map.
If we can disable their broadcasts, we give the people a chance to fight back.
Ethan nodded, though doubt lingered in his eyes. Maria traced her finger along the map to a heavily guarded broadcasting station.
This is their nerve center. We get in, we cut the feed, and we replace it with the truth.
Ethan exhaled sharply.
It's a suicide mission.
Maria's jaw tightened.
It's our only chance.
Ethan looked around at the group.
We've lost too many people already.
Maria met his gaze.
We've come too far to stop now. You know that.
After a long silence, Ethan nodded.
Let's do it.
From the safety of a darkened safe house, Ethan watched Blake address the nation again. His words were fervent, his promises of stability and security resonating with many.
We are building a stronger future, one that will endure.
Ethan turned off the screen, his jaw tight.
Not if I can help it.
He murmured. As the safe house plunged into darkness, Ethan slung a bag over his shoulder and stepped into the night. His breath formed clouds in the cold air as he disappeared into the forest.
This isn't over.
He whispered, his silhouette swallowed by the shadows.